今日もいい子にしてたにゃ。
はあ、眠い。はあ、
病気さん。
あ、病気さん、いらっしゃい。そう、ジャンタマニャなんですけど、ニャなんですが。この手はチートイにしかなんないですよ。なんか昼寝しちゃって、昼寝なんか変な時間に寝ちゃって、夜寝れるかな、俺は。これね、9ピンか。 なんかもう白とか切りたくないよね、ここまで来ると。ここまで来ての白はもうあんま切りたくないな。これで1、4泣くんだ。両面払いですからね、これね。両面払いで、わざわざこれで泣いて、もうトイトイでしょ。で、薬杯が多分絡んで、薬杯って言ったらもう白しかないですもんね。であとドラドラかなんか持ってるような、そんな感じでしょ、これ。漫画あるじゃん。ああ、やめですね。まあ、裏がなくてよかった。こんな浮いたドラ、どうすんのこれ。えらい。まあ、何切って目いっぱいが普通っちゃ普通なんだろうけどな。こんな両面から泣き始める理由が本当に僕にはもう正直は全然わからない。なんでこんな両面から泣き始めるんですかね。その両面から泣き始めるってもう鼻から面前で手を進める気がないってことですけどね、これね。いやー、悩ましいね、これ。 切りちょびいっちゃったな。ダメかな。まあチーピンぐらいはかして。これ入ったら勝負になっちゃいますね。うん。6球も当たってんのか。はあ、よかった。入んなくて。素直なら3ピン切りだけどね。こっそり差し子を見てんだよね。 ローマン。飛んでくのかよ。もう、はいはい。もう、ほんとついてんな。他切るのあったかな。イーソー以外であのタイミングで何切んの？本当にもう K 点にでも受けねえともうこんななどうにもなんねえよ本当に。クソゲ
わはは12125さん、ぽんにゃ。
プレイスルさんこんばんは。マウスがない。あった。はぁ。 うわ、9万円悪くないけど、9万1万3枚入れるか。
リーチや。スーモこれぞ天下。リーチクモ。
もうさ、お高勢のシャアをもう一泣きするってもう、本一ですっていう宣言でしょ。バカなのかな、本当に。やだな、俺こんなの食いたくねえんだけどな。本当に。トイトイってこと？
病気さん、自分だったらこれハノータイムで中泣くぽよ。
それさ、残球にしてさ、そんなに残球偉いっていう話なわけですよ、結局ね。6700点離れてんすよ、今。すげえな、もうトイトイに向かってさ、シャアから泣くってもう考えらんないんだけど、そんな麻雀。何その麻雀は。ほんと考えらんねえ。これ残球でさ、1曲回しちゃうっていうのはさ、基本的にはないよね。って僕は思う。いいピックなんだよね。降りてるっぽいんだよな。ちょっと降りてる気がするな。はぁ、 ほんとああいうもう麻雀もうわけがわかんねえわ。何あのトイトイ狙いって。もう意味がわかんない。バカなのかな、本当に。まだバカなことやってるよ、本当に。本当に。もうさ。両面払いよ。またこういうさ、わけのわかんないトイトイ狙い、もうトイトイ狙いっていうのがもう本当に普通じゃないもんね。頭おかしいよ。頭おかしいよ。ほんと中国人らしいよね。麻雀が。ああ、いた。ああ、もう激痛。どうすんのこんなの。ポンして。ポンしなくてもよかったかな。したくなかったな。 あんなシャーポンしちゃいけねえな。こんなとこできてもしょうがないんだよな。
し
なんもないんですけど、これ。はあ。
リーチにゃ
わはは1万2125さん、一計。
いかない。言ってもしょうがないよ、こんなの。こんなの行く意味は本当はないと思いますよ。1枚切ってもいいと思う。なんかでもいいさ。これが変わんなさそうなんだもん。いつまでもいつまでも。何も引かないよ。初天敗でしょ、これ。初天敗じゃねえな。2回目か。さっきの天敗は不利になったからね。隠れドラさんの。上がってもしょうがないっちゃしょうがないんだ、これ。本音は。しかし、本当にツモ悪いな。何も持ってきてないじゃん、結局手代わりを。しょうもな。と腐れ相撲だな。よっしゃ。親が流れなかったのはいい話。 いや、これ難しい。トラ切っちゃいてえな。イラつくな、このクソ相撲は、本当に。クソ相撲だな。もう、なんなの、一体これ。本当に。ねえねえねえ。うるせえ。
リーチにゃし
これで一曲回っちゃうのはそうなんだよ。やってみるんだけどな。あいつも2着か。倍積もにならないよ来るね。 高め3層ですか。
リーチや。ロン福来た。リーチ一発ドラ。
はい、ラスク。
呪詛像感で内から金を巻き上げられる人なんていません。
わはは12125さん、いいもの見れた。
うん、本当ですよ。とうぜえな、このクソゲーは。引きゃしねえよ、本当にもう。と懲罰モードがうぜえ。またチーチャだから多分懲罰モードなんじゃないですか。
わはは12125さん、ブチギレだー。
うん。イラつくもん、このクソゲー。アホな中国人と同じ卓をやらせんのが間違いだよ。あいつらさ、ほんと日本麻雀やんないやつと同じ卓にしてほしくねえわ。めんどくせえ。中国麻雀の卓作れって本当に思うわ。心の底から思うわ。こういうラメか。
チ
うざ。
わはは12125さん、いっけー。
いかないいかないいかない。リーのミっすよ。2000点だよ、これ、ただの。
ポンあポンリーチ
わはは12125さん、わはは12125は、熱烈アンチを覚えました。
ふふん。 とクソみたいなハイパイしか持ってこないな俺。
うん。リーチにゃ。ロン、それからチン、裏。
病気さん、ドラの宝石箱や
そうは言ってもね、ちょっと微妙っちゃ微妙なんですよね。これ難しいな。まあ素直に打てるか。素直に打つならこうかな。
熱烈アンチさん、ほのかに香るチートイ警察の匂い。
それもあるしね。それもあるんだけど。テンパイ取るの？俺の中でテンパイはこっちの方がちょっと嬉しいじゃないですかね。ちょっとテンパイ取んなかった甲斐が出てきてほしい。君がリーチするんなら俺はダマでよかったんだけどな。3品現物なんだけど。 くらでもドラ持ってくるよ。6級ピンなら上がってましたか。
ポン。あ、ポン。あ、ポン。いつも全部ちょうだい。チュンドラ。
こんなさ、チーピンが一巡間に合っちゃってるあたりがもうほんとダメだね。
あ、ポン。
なんでこれチーピン切れてんのって。チーピンじゃなくたってよかったんじゃねえの？
ロン。それちょうだい。ポン。トン。ドラ2。ドラ。マンガン。
よくあんなとこでチーピン切れてんな。ウーピン切りリーチだよ。その辺の常識がわかんねえ。はぁ、
楽しみ。
つうかこれなんもねえな。
妻、ピーチ、一発、妻、天空、裏。マンマン。ポン。
熱烈アンチさん、全然見てないうちに神茶5万、6000点持ちって何があったんだ、わら。
ガンガン積もってるだけですよ。ひたすら何でも積もっちゃうだけ。そんな変わったことはないですよ。
カン。
こんなの3連続チーチャとかさ、もうほんとめんどくさくてしょうがねえわ。合うぜ。 もうしょうがないからリーチするけどさ、もうやめてよ、こんなの親じゃなかったら本当に。あーうざ。
熱烈アンチさん、キャッキャ。
ほんとイラつくんだよね、これね。クソゲーだ、ほんとに。まあ、あんことかさ。うぜ。ピンズがだいたいさ、もう場に高いからさ、こんなのさ、全然自信がないよね。
熱烈アンチさん、今日はいつもよりイラついてんね。
いいピンになってるあたりがまだ救いだよ。そんなクソってどうでもいいもん。初上がりでしょ。本当にさ、イラつくよ。クソってしか来ねえしさ。こんなんやめだよ、本当に。こんなハイパイ。前に進むだけ損だよ、こんなハイパイ。この天部さんの親じゃなかったら、こんなのやめてるよ。はいはいって感じだよね。はいはいって。泣ける牌が欲しかったよ今。完全に泣く気だったわ。さあすごいよ、もう分かるんだもんね。ああこれで親かぶりをするんだってもう思った通りなんだもん、本当に。すげえ分かりやすいよ。 まあいいや、コーヒー入れとこよ。
70つすさん、こんばんは。病気さん、夫のトイトチドロップス忘れずもらおうね。
もらえるようにしてましたよ、確か。してなかったかな。ツイッチのドロップってあれ、ショップであれもらえるのがあるん
フェス3日目の今日は確か確率で車両も当たるからぜひ聞きたい。
マジっすか？知らなかった。でも今いなくない？ドロップの人。ドロップもらえる人っている？やってなくないですか？
病気さん、URL 省略。
It's all about getting the authenticity right because the world really wants to understand what it was like to see this equipment.
これ何？
You know, we don't want to sort of lead them astray in terms of sort of getting modern stuff. This is all authentic equipment.
And I'd imagine probably most of the questions you get from the general public are about the arms.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Richard. Yeah, everybody's interested in the guns. We live in a PC gaming world where they've all seen them on all sorts of games. But the reality is, most people have never got to see them up close and personal. We give them the opportunity to see these things in the flesh.
これアジアじゃない、UK じゃないですか。UK の配信でももらえるんですか、これ。
病気さん、日本波今日やらないよ。
あ、そうなんだ。
病気さん、フェス派全リージョン共通だからね。
ああ、なるほどね。ダイナミックパパさんがドロップなしよって、そんな、この人意味がないじゃん。ダイナミックパパさんの配信をこう、とりあえずその場にいさせる意味がないじゃん。あの人のプレイ見てても面白くないからな。
病気さん、今回ハックじゃなくて公式専用のドロップス。
ああ、そうなんだ。なるほどね。バンクフェスト。戦車やろうかな。麻雀より戦車の方がまだ健全な気がしてきた。麻雀つまんなさすぎるわ。戦車何気に今日はなんか調子良かった気がちょっとするんだよな。そんなことねえかな。そんなことはねえのか。そんな勝ち越してるわけでもねえしな。 分発的にまあまあ良かったって大丈夫か。つうか9乗ってたからな、今日な。9の選手は大体いいんだよな、俺。なんか9だけ乗ってたらまあ、そのまんまユニカムになれる気がするわ。ならないけど。バイツも変わんのか。バイツもなるのこれ。ならないね。メンタン募って3色赤。2つ足りないもんね。6チッパーになっても2つ足りない。メンタンピンツも3色になんねえのか。ドラドラじゃな。
リー楽しみ。
まあやめるけど。
リーチ
うん。3色でいい。3人でいいよ。またテンパっちゃったんですけど。関数ピンってフリーテンだね。ひどいな、これ。でもなんもね。テンパ維持できるなら維持したい。ちょぐっとあってトップになんねえのによくこんなもんリーチするよね。
こういう時は笑うべきなのかな。
これでラストだな。これの、ドロップスはどういうあれなんだ。ああ、うざい。 またちいちゃなんだな、つうかよ。本当に。うぜえな、ほんと。はぁ。うざ。全リージョン共通か。
Not be happy at all.
A little bit ropey.
面白そうだ
A
な
bit。rusty, yes. As you can see there, of course, at the moment you can hear, as Richard said,
日本の配信と違って向こうの配信面白そうなんだ。
forces are squaring off to each other in there. I don't think there's any prizes for who's going to win.
To be honest, the Germans got a pretty bad track record at Tankfest. We always take the line, if the Germans want to win at Tankfest, they can organise their own event.
And also there, of course, don't forget there to have your Twitch.
ウォーゲーミングジャパンはなんであんなクソみたいな配信しかでき
And
ねえんだ
also
ろ
don't forget the mega sale of World of
ほん
Tanks.
といつももう
23 fantastic premium shop bundles with discounts up to 40%. So all the details are there and the links are in the description.
And don't forget as well, you can support the Tank Museum too. You can donate through Tiltify, or you can make a donation through the Super Chat, which sounds fantastic, on YouTube. Now we're going to move on from the battle here, and one of the things we normally have at Tankfest every year is we've got guest vehicles from around the world. Our fellow museums bring vehicles to show off. This year it's not been possible because of the travel restrictions that were involved in COVID recently, and we were unable to plan them in. However, we have been able to try and bring them in different ways.
So what we did was we actually asked all the museums if, of course, these travel restrictions weren't in place, what is it from your museum that you would love to bring to Tankfest?
And our first guests are going to be our friends in the Arsenal Museum in Sweden, and they're going to show off what they've got.
Welcome to the land of weird designs. Here we are at the Swedish Tank Museum, and I will show you a vehicle that we would like to take to Tankfest. This is the Landsverk L30 Wilcom track vehicle from 1931, the only existing example in the world. And this is the result of an idea from many countries to find a solution on the problems they had with bad reliability and low speed on tracked vehicles. And this is a design that Landsverk, who was becoming a leading company in tank design during the 1920s, they came up with this idea with a combination of wheels and tracks. A fantastic vehicle. This prototype is the only one ever built. It has a crew of 3 to 4 and 14 millimeters of armor. It was supposed to be armed with a 37mm or 47mm main gun. It has a weight of 11.5 tons, and the engine at the rear is a Maybach V12 petrol engine, 8 liters and 150 horsepower. With the tracks, it had a pretty good cross-country performance at a speed of 35 kilometers an hour, and in only 20 seconds it could change from tracks to wheels, and with a top speed at 75 to 80 kilometers an hour, it could travel long distances at high speed. On the inside there is a driver at the front, and at the rear there is a rear driver position for reversing the vehicle. How cool is that? But the driver's position is the result of a designer that got a bit carried away. It is as complicated as it can be, with 14 levers and pedals and one steering wheel. How cool would it be to take this vehicle to Tankfest and see it running? In our collection we have a lot of interesting and unique vehicles. If you would like to explore the collection, please have a look at Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. See you out there.
A massive thank you to Stefan and his team there from the Swedish Tank Museum in Arsenal, and what a beautiful museum it is. I've been fortunate enough to be there a few times now, and I absolutely love it.
It's a terrific museum, and actually in a lovely part of the world over there as well. And if you go to that museum this year, you see a tank museum vehicle. They've actually got our Porsche Turret King Tiger is on loan to them the whole of this year. So if you're living in Sweden and you want the chance to see some really rare German tanks,
やべえ、この戦争ごっこ面白そう。
the only one in the world. Just behind us, a German just been hit behind us. The battle's in full flow, as you can probably hear. The Germans are taking a bit of a pacing, to be honest. I think they're an armoured car and a couple of half-track down, anti-tank going out of action. It's all looking a bit bleak. There's a Hetzer which is just retreating next to me. So it's all kicking off, as it tends to at Tankfest, especially when you're here live in Bovington. And again, just if you want to be able to support our work, do look up the Supply and check out the Tank Museum there if you want to support us that way.
And also, don't forget, of course, the Tankfest Mega Sale 2022 details on the portal, or again, make sure that you're checking out those Twitch drops.
And so the battle continues to rage behind. I think the Americans are making some quite good progress.
ウォーゲーミングジャパンだって富士の総合火力演習でもさ取材に行けばいいんだよ。
By the looks of it.
よっぽ
We're
ど
going
楽
to
しいじ
cut
ゃん。そんな
away in
の
a second to carry on exploring the tank museum's Tankfest event. So the event isn't just what's going on in the arena. There's all sorts of activities around us. We had a chance earlier as we saw Richard was exploring the living history area. But there's many more things than that. And actually, next up, Richard's going to be exploring the tank park, which is kind of the beating soul of the Tankfest event, where the tank crews are laid up, the volunteers who make Tankfest work, do their work. And Richard's going to be exploring that on our next video now.
I'm here now on the Vehicle Tank Park, where the guests of Tankfest actually form up prior to going onto the arena. It's a great place for visitors to go, not only, of course, to see the vehicles, but also meet the stars of the show, the crews of the vehicles. And one of those stars, do you like that, Frank?
Thank you.
I'm with here at the moment. It's Mr. Frank Wood from Eden Camp.
Hi, Rich. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And thank you so much for coming down, Frank. Frank, firstly, kick us off with a bit more about Eden Camp.
Yeah, no problem. Eden Camp's a World War II museum based up in North Yorkshire. We are basically the original buildings that were put up in 1942 housed a population of German prisoners of war. Basically, the buildings have survived. We now look after those. That's our primary kind of goal. And we house our museum in those buildings. And we also have a vehicle collection. The vehicle collection includes our wonderful M50 Sherman. And good plug, eh? I did all right there, didn't I? Yeah, certainly good. And it's become quite famous today, certainly, as the blue one, because we've restored it as the Lebanese SLA, the Southern Lebanese Army Blue. And that basically was its last military incarnation. So we've got the history all the way from 1942 to 1982.
How was your trip down, Frank?
It was all right, yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was an early start. We've been very lucky in that the Tank Museum organised the transport with a low loader, and we sent a brilliant team up to collect our Sherman, and we transported it wonderfully safely. As you can see, it's here, so it's all right. It ends well, all right, doesn't it? So
Let's have a little wander around the tank park. I mean, for you, anything particularly, obviously yours is the best, of course, you'd say. Anything that particularly sticks in your mind?
yeah, well, yeah, the tank park's great because there's so much to pick from it. Though it's a massive gathering of vehicles from all different types and all different sources. To me, is brilliant. But my particular favourite this year is the M4A4, which we've ended up being parked next to, which is really good because our Sherman as a standard back in 1942 was an M4A4, so it's been great to be able to directly compare it and look at the add-ons and the cuts and all the rest of it that have been made to make our vehicle into an M50.
Do you find it? I mean, as a crew, it must be really interesting that some of the questions that the general public come and ask you.
Yeah, interesting's a word for it. We do get, so I pride myself on a little bit of research. I enjoy that side of things, and we do get some brilliant questions, I have to say. And yesterday I was speaking to a guide in the Tank Museum who had questions I didn't know the answers to, and he was helping me learn So that's been brilliant. I think it's always important to remain humble and be open to learning from other people and speak. And again, that's happened at Tankfest because I've met a guy who basically had a different knowledge than me, and between us we've cobbled something together. So it's been. It turns out our gym might have had a wading kit on it, which is again wartime and British and a really nice part of our story.
And why do you think, I mean, the importance of Tankfest, you know, your personal opinion, why is it so important for people to come down here? And why do you think it's so popular?
I think, so I'm going to use an Eden Camp tagline to describe this. I'm going to use our little bitty, which is the sights, the sounds and the smells of World War II. And that's what we try to show people and talk to people about. And I think Tankfest absolutely evokes the same emotion and sensations here and there. So you certainly see them, you can certainly hear them, and they certainly smell. So I think probably that whole thing is really what we're talking about. And I think as long as we can use that as museum and as owners to speak about the history inside of things and help people understand why, where and what happened or could happen, I think probably that's a great thing, isn't it?
And as a vehicle owner, what's your biggest concern?
So I don't really have any concerns, I have to say. We're fairly easy and breezy today. Breakdowns, of course, are something that'll be present, and everyone here, everyone will be thinking about it. For me, I think breakdowns are breakdowns. It can happen in modern cars, can't it? You know, it could happen if it was brand new or not. And I think really we've just got to remember that they are tanks, they're living, breathing things, and we want to show you them. So come and learn about them, and we'll tell you how we're fixing it if it breaks. You know, same difference in it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Frank. Hope you have a great Tankfest and good luck with everything.
No problem. Thank you.
We are live at Tankfest 2022, and that was the Tank Park, which is really the centerpiece of a lot of what happens here in terms of this living display of moving historic armor. As you can see, we give everybody a chance to actually have a walk around the Tank Park itself to see what's there and to speak to the crew. What stood out for you there this year, Richard?
I think, you know, I said the Tank Park is, and I said to you before, my favourite place of the whole of Tankfest, to be honest, because it's just where you get an opportunity to meet the crews. I'm not going to say a favourite, because I'll be probably beaten up by various people who own the vehicles, but it was a great selection there. And again, for people to come up there and talk about their particular vehicle, the history behind it, and a lot of them, of course, give you the opportunity to have a look inside as well, which is very special for any visitor.
And as you've experienced yourself, the driving a vehicle in real life, hearing it and seeing it is completely different from anything else you can possibly experience.
Oh, absolutely. You just can't, you know, no matter how much you read about it, no matter how much research you do, nothing compares to seeing the vehicle drive around your arena or indeed just jumping into the turret and the smell of the oil.
Absolutely. And on the subject of driving vehicles, we saw earlier that Richard still got it behind the Attilas of a Chieftain, but we decided we weren't going to leave it there, and instead of just on the Chieftain, we thought we'd give him a go of Leopard 1 for our next episode of Tank Top Gear.
This is the Nimble Leopard 1. It's German, although this particular one was used by the Canadian Armed Forces. Weighing a relatively light 40 tons, it has an impressive top speed of 40 miles per hour and a range of 370 miles. This was West Germany's first foray into tank production since the war. And it turned out to be a roaring success, exemplifying the quality of German engineering. Porsche was involved in the design, and it's named after a big cat. But that's where the similarities to its World War II predecessors end. Because when you compare the Leopard to the Tigers, you'll see just how far German doctrine has shifted since their defeat to the Allies. Mobility was now the priority, ahead of armour and firepower. In so many ways, Leopard is the opposite of its contemporary and competitor, the British Chieftain. Leopard entered service with the German Army in 1965, serving until 2003 when it was replaced in German service by Leopard 2. It was developed around a version of the British L7 105mm rifles gun, the same gun that was used on the successful Centurion tank. But it is lightly armoured, and its thickest is 280mm thinner than the Chieftain. As a result, the crew rely on speed and stealth to avoid enemy fire, which is a perfectly sound strategy if you've got an engine that actually works, and this one does. This engine is far more reliable and easier to maintain. So whilst blokes like me were sweating over the Chieftain on the tank park, our NATO friends were already getting the beers in. It also proved to be a tank that could be upgraded without compromising its performance, with a succession of upgrades to the armour, communications and the systems controlling the gun. As popular as it was with its crews, it was never seriously tested in combat. As a tank crewman myself, I would wonder how the reliance on mobility to get you out of trouble would have fared in defensive combat situations. Even so, Leopard 1 is a neat tank. But how does it perform on the track? The driver's cab is really together. And what I mean by that is that the startup procedure is straightforward, the controls are simple, and the driving position is absolutely fantastic. Now straight away, the big difference for me is I'm driving with no steering levers like I'm used to, but I've got this control lever directly in front of me. Now this is great. I think I did say the Chieftain steering was responsive. Well, I might have to withdraw that comment, as this is considerably better. It's almost a little too good. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, because you have to be quite careful. The first few turns you can actually oversteer, and it does turn the tank quite sharply, but again, this is nothing after a few laps of the track. You can certainly get used to this pretty quickly. The automatic gearbox, dead straightforward, neutral into drive, foot on the accelerator, and away we go. The ride is smooth, it is fantastic, it's an absolute pleasure to drive. The only thing I wish with this vehicle is, A, I had more time, and B, that the track was considerably bigger. It was a great export success, and I can see why. It's comfortable, light, nimble, and quick. It's almost fun to drive. Around 6,500 Leopards were built, serving with over 15 different nations, and several hundred are still in service today. Many nations that have previously operated Centurion opted for the Leopard instead of Chieftain, because despite having less armour and less firepower, it was quick, packed a punch, and crucially, it worked. Now you've seen how the Leopard rides in the arena, why don't you take it for a spin yourself in the world of tanks?
Welcome back live to here at the Tank Museum in the south of England in Bovington, and we're here at Tankfest 2022. Richard, Leopard 1, how does that compare to Chieftain then?
Well, I just listened back to that, of course, and I thought I sounded a bit over-enthusiastic with Leopard 1, didn't I? So it's a bit embarrassing.
Feeling disloyal?
No, I was feeling slightly disloyal. I have to say, though, what a fantastic vehicle. I mean, it really was. The simplicity, the ride, the acceleration. As I said at the end there about the size of the track, I just wish you had a much bigger arena so you could really open it up. Joyous.
They do have a lot of oomph, don't they?
They do. I mean, it's I said I can't be disloyal to Chieftain, it'd be impossible. But of course, driving that straight after you drove with Chieftain was a marked difference.
So we're really fortunate. We've got a terrific collection of Leopard 1s here. We've got those. We've got 2 Canadian ones, which are great. They came to us in about 2006. And we've also got a German one, and we're really looking forward. Actually, we're in the process of acquiring an Australian Leopard 1 as well, which will be another experience altogether as well.
And it's not just that you can hear the noise of the engine, can't you? It's just such an impressive engine noise as well. There's just everything about it. But again, I'm getting far too over-enthusiastic about a Leopard 1.
They do. Although they were built with that wonderful feature that Chieftain never had, which we call starting.
Of course, but of course, I mean, we're not talking. We were just looking at driving. We're not talking about the main armament and everything. And of course, Chieftain arguably did have the best main armament on that particular era tank.
Best tank in the world that broke down in a good firing.
Yes.
As we said, we are here live at Tankfest 2022. This is the Tank Museum's big fundraising event of the year, so you've got the opportunity to support through Tiltify. Similarly, on World of Tanks, there's Twitch drops going on, throughout the day. But our next segment is building on a pattern we've had so far, where we've been inviting our friends across the world to send vehicles to TankFest for many years. This year they weren't able to bring anything, but we've asked them each to do a video about if you could have brought a vehicle to TankFest, what would it be? In our next visit, we're heading off to North America, to the US Armour and Cavalry Collection in Fort Benning.
Hi, I'm Rob Kogan. I'm the curator here at the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Armor and Cavalry Collection serves as the historic teaching collection for the U.S. Army's Armor School, teaching all American tankers and cavalry scouts the history of their branch, as well as the technical developments of the equipment used. So when the Tank Museum asked us to present a tank for TankFest Online, there's a lot that come to mind. Vehicles that capture the imagination, that are almost larger than life. Vehicles like this German Tiger II behind me here that fought in the Battle of Bulge. But today we're not going to talk about the Tiger II. No, we're going to talk about an American tank that was developed at the end of World War II, that was designed to actually kill Tiger IIs, to kill King Tigers. And that American tank is the T-29 heavy tank. By mid-1944, the U.S. Army already had the M26 Pershing tank, as it would be known, already developed. But the Pershing had only been designed to take on Tiger Is and Panthers. By the time the Allies are going in through northern France, we're starting to see the King Tiger, or Tiger II, already starting to make an appearance. And there was already concern in the U.S. Army, what if we have to fight more of these heavy German tanks as we go further into the Third Reich? And so, starting in September 1944, the Army puts out a call for a new heavy tank, and that's going to be designated the T-29. So the T-29 should look pretty familiar for most fans of American tanks. The hull is actually just a large M26 Pershing hull that lengthens to a common 8 road wheels. And then finally, the track, while it's the same steel T-80 track initially put on the first Pershings, it's now been extended by adding extended end connectors, or duckbills often referred to in history, to give it a wider surface area and better flotation. Propulsion was provided by the Ford GAC V12 engine, which gave it 770 horsepower at 2,800 RPM. The armor thickness on the front of the hull is actually the same as the M26 Pershing, only 4 inches of steel. The front of the turret is 7 inches thick steel. Looking at the gun shield here, it goes from 7 inches to 11 inches of additional steel. Now, the most important feature of the T-29 heavy tank is, of course, the T5E1 105mm main gun, designed to give it that edge over heavy German tanks. While the T-29 would never see actual combat surface and was only built in small numbers, it's important to note that it and its test variants would have dramatic effect on later American designs, including the M48 and M60 family of tanks. If you'd like to know more about what we're doing here at the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection, please follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You're watching TankFest Online 2022. What a fantastic collection they've got there, Richard.
They have got some nice stuff, haven't they? We were really lucky a few years ago. We did a display of Tigers, and we had 4 of the 6 variants here as well. One of the ones we were missing was Elephant, and a conversation with my opposite number in the US got the Elephants coming our way, and actually adding something to line up. It was superb. It's actually a very generous loan by them. We had it here for about 2 years altogether.
And I've never been to see this collection, unfortunately. Have you?
It's got to be on the travel list.
Definitely on the travel list.
They've got some cracking stuff over there, and I think actually everyone who watches this stream today will get some really good holiday ideas.
And you're watching at the moment, you may be able to see, perhaps in the background there, we've just got some of the vehicles, some of the D-Day vehicles, so the US and the Allied vehicles forming up there. And this was all part of Armour and the Embarkation Parade, which was actually on last weekend, Richard.
Yeah, it was last weekend.
Armour and Embarkation. So it's a really paying a tribute to the some 140,000 vehicles and 500,000 men that took part in that D-Day operation.
And many of those men actually stayed here in Dorset before they went off to fight in Normandy, and there's a real connection between people here in Dorset, and particularly the US Army, who a lot of their people who left from here weren't able to come back home afterwards.
Don't forget, of course, to support the museum through the various means there, Patreon, Tiltify, etc. Do not forget to check out the World of Tanks portal as far as the TankFest 2022 Mega Fest is concerned there.
But next up, we're going to carry on exploring the Tank Fest site. Tank Fest, as I said earlier, isn't just about what's happening on the arena. There's the museum itself, we've seen the tank park, there's all sorts of things to explore and find out when you come here. And earlier on today, we saw Richard disappearing off with his wallet. And I'm wondering where he went to go next.
Now, there are plenty of places at Tankfest to spend your money, and I like nothing more than a good bargain. Now, of course, I'm here with a man at the moment who knows more than most about picking up a good deal. It's Mr. Bruce Crumpton, of course, from Combat Dealers.
Lovely to see you again. I've got to be honest with you. Wonderful to be here. The fact they crossed me between Del Boy and Dale Winters means I like a good deal. But for anybody spending the day here, they're a fantastic picking. Listen, I love coming here. You know, I come every year. I'm a big supporter of the Tank Museum. Every year there's something different to see, somebody different to talk to. I've been asked to give a bit of a talk today, which I'm over the moon about. But it's nice to see you as well. I'll be able to get that tenner back on me.
Now, Bruce, I do believe we were talking before. We were saying, oh, you know, the models. You've got a bit of a story about Armatech.
So with Armatech, years ago, I've actually got one of their Hexa models. And when they were first doing the Hexa model, it must be 10 years ago now, they actually came up to our house. He's got one here. What they did was, they actually took the sound off our running Hexa, which was really cool. But again, now what they're producing, everything. I mean, I've got to be honest with you, I'm half thinking of getting rid of all my stuff and going to this stuff. It's a lot cheaper to run and a lot better. But look at the beauty and the quality of these models. I mean, the Bird Panther, as you know, we finished the Panther ourselves last year. And believe me, that was a lot of work, but I think I'd rather have one of them. Doing that Panther, it broke the Fraudy workshop. But it's just great to see these people doing a display on all these wonderful models they're doing. You know, hopefully, you know, if I stand here talking long enough, they might present me with one. No.
Bruce, I mean, the whole collective thing, how did you first get into it?
Right, for me, look, I've told the story many, many times. I've always been interested in military history. It is my passion. I've got to be honest, it's my passion. So 11 years old, I've been into, and I used to walk home past a guy's house, and at the bottom of his garden, he had a greenhouse with a German helmet with daffodils coming out of it. The last day I was at my primary school, I thought to myself, go on, go and ask. I banged on the door, and he went, what are you talking about, mate? I said, do you want to sell it? I didn't have a tanner, right? And he came back and he said to me, there you go. And he tipped the daffs out and he gave it to me. That started me. Now, from there, obviously, this passion, and don't, you know, okay, Second World War vehicles that we restore, wonderful. And I love to see these wonderful displays. But I'm interested in all aspects of history. Some of the kit they've got here from the First World War is superb. Some of the stuff more recent conflicts, you know, you mustn't forget about those guys, you know, that fought in Afghanistan, Iraq and everywhere else. They've just got a wonderful display of everything you could possibly want to see across the board here with every type of tank. I mean, I'm just looking there, look at the arrangements there that they've got, the displays they've got. There's something for everybody here, there really is.
Now, in your collection, have you got a favourite?
I've got to be honest with you, of my vehicles, it's probably still my Svinwagen, which is a German amphibious Jeep. Now, I got that in about 1985, and I got it from France, and it came from a monastery, and it's being used by the monks to go and get their groceries. And that's the part. I've still got that, it still runs beautifully, I'm really proud of it. It's probably my favourite vehicle. We've got a lot of bigger vehicles, obviously. You know, we've restored Panthers, we're doing Hexas, we're doing 251s, we're doing all kinds of things. But I've got to be honest with you, my passion has always been my Svinwagen.
And to finish this off, Bruce, I mean, why should people come down to Tankfest?
Why should come down here? Because you don't know what you're missing. This place is the most fantastic place to bring anybody that's interested in military armour. It's the best tank museum in the world and a wonderful day out for everybody and their family.
Brilliant. Bruce, thank you so much for your time. Have a great weekend.
My pleasure. Gives that tenner. How's that?
We're here live at Tankfest 2022, and that was Bruce Crompton there of Combat Dealers fame, a great friend of the Tank Museum over many years. So, Richard, did you manage to find the wife's birthday present there today?
I think, Richard, I told you, I brought the wife. The last time was a pair of the Tank Museum shop slippers, the Tiger One slippers.
How did they go down?
Put it this way, not particularly well.
For our anniversary, I bought my wife. We've got these great ice cube molds, and one of them's in the shape of a hand grenade.
あ、これでもうドロップしてもらえるの？
I gave that to my wife for an anniversary present.
早いな。
Didn't go down well, nearly as well as I'd expected.
So, but I mean, wasn't it lovely to catch up with Bruce? I mean, he is an absolute. I mean.
ゲームで会ってる友達とリアルで会うことがなんか楽しいというか、一緒にご飯行った時とかに名前を呼ぶんですよ。ジャッカルさんとか言って、どう見てもジャッカルさんっぽくない人に対してジャッカルさんって言うんですよ。リアルと PC ゲームの中を行き来して人生を楽しんでる感じがあって、すごく嬉しいですね。
This is where the Americans sprang from. To go, and then actually even around here in Swanage, for instance, where their American is based, there's still graffiti from American soldiers in some of the guest houses. They found some recently in some lockers and some walls in guest houses where these guys are leaving their mark in very similar way. Actually, the previous war, it was all Australians. 120,000 Australians went through Dorset in the First World War. Now we're going to move on to carry on. Torturing Richard with various challenges, where we gave him a chance to get behind the wheel of, or get behind the tillers of a chieftain. He's had to go a leopard, and we didn't leave it there because having not broken either of those, we thought we'd complete the kind of the Western triumvirate and give Richard the chance of the next Tank Top Gear challenge to try out the American M60.
This is the M60. It's big, it's noisy, and it's brash. It has to be American. Weighing 47 tons, it's a top speed of 30 miles per hour and a range of 300 miles. And like other successful American tanks, it's so utilitarian and competent, so functional, that it's almost, well, a bit boring. The M60 does exactly what it says on the tin, but it lacks the experimental quirks of its British and German Cold War contemporaries. The reason for this is that unlike the Brits and the Germans, the M60 designers didn't sit down with a blank sheet of paper to redraw what a tank should be. The M60 is an evolutionary descendant of the M48, which is itself a descendant of the M46, which is a descendant of the M26, and it shows. The M60 entered service in 1960, becoming the USA's most numerous MBT during the Cold War years. Over 15,000 were built by Chrysler, and they would be used by over 25 other nations, with many still in service in Egypt, Turkey and Saudi Arabia. The key differences between the M48 and the M60 are specifically a bigger engine in the shape of the Continental V12 twin-turbo diesel, and also a better gun in the form of the British L7 105mm, as fitted to the Centurion and the Leopard 1. But surprisingly, there weren't any great improvements in armour thickness, at least initially. At its thickest point, the armour is 102mm, which is some way short of the 350mm boasted by the Chieftain. But this is another one of those designs with enormous capacity to be modernised and upgraded, and there have been a range of improvements applied to enhance mobility, armour protection and its weapon systems. The first nation to use them in anger were the Israeli forces during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where they performed well against the Soviet-built T-62. The US would deploy them in significant numbers during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, where they successfully took on the T-72. So don't get me wrong, the M60 is a decent tank. Its long service and combat records speak for itself. It just wasn't as groundbreaking as the Chieftain and Leopard. Let's see how it compares on the track. M60 first impressions, well, the starter procedure is particularly simple and straightforward, certainly the best of the three. gear changes, semi-automatic gearbox, low and high ratio. I'm not that optimistic that I'll get into high, but maybe on the straight, I'll certainly give it a go. The steering is very, very different to any other tank that I've driven before. You have to be really light on the steering, and there is a real tendency to overcorrect until you're used to it. All in all, you know, what can I say? It's a really functional vehicle. Even though the M60 remains in service around the world, its time was up with the introduction of the US's own step-change design, the M1 Abrams. The M60 is a great example of how a progressive system of upgrades can keep a weapons system viable for half a century. And when I say it's a bit boring, I suppose it's only boring in the same way as Sherman is boring. It's a tank that effectively and competently does the job it is designed to do, for which there aren't any major complaints. So if you want to take control of an M60 yourself, check it out in World of Tanks.
Welcome back live to Tankfest 2022. So Richard, the three kind of classic Cold War Western vehicles, how do you rank them then?
Well, this is, I mean, it's hard to rank them as far as, let's just talk about the driving experience, but we'll leave sort of main armaments apart from that. I mean, I have to say there that talking about the M60 was an absolute delight, as I said. I mean, I did say it's a functional vehicle, but there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it absolutely does what it says on the tin. I would have to say pure driving, all right. I mean, I'm going to have to admit Leopard 1. We just had it in the bag there. For the other two, I'm not going to make any comment because, of course, I want to say M60 is 2 and Chieftain 3, but I'm not going to.
But deep down, the one you would take home to introduce to your mum would be Chieftain.
Absolutely, of course. Yeah, of course.
Naturally. That almost goes without saying. So we're here live at Tankfest 2022. You can see the display carry on behind us, and it's not long before we're going to cut over to our main Second World War display live from the arena here. But in the meantime, we're going to carry on exploring Tankfest. And Richard's been he's been looking around to see what's out there. A few minutes away ago, he was exploring and having a look in the inside of the Tank Museum's workshop with one of our trustees and volunteers.
I'm now in the workshops of the Tank Museum. Now, the Tank Museum relies heavily on the volunteers, and they are incredible people who give up their time and effort to come here and help on the vehicles. Now, one of these volunteers, who perhaps is maybe a bit more than a volunteer, is also a trustee and also a vehicle owner, is William Bannister.
Hello there, nice to meet you again.
You too, William. How has your Tankfest been so far?
It's been good. I've had a bit of fun this morning playing out with the vehicles, and then I had to do my trustee thing, put my jacket and tie on and look respectable, and then back down in the workshops and helping the gang.
So how long have you been volunteering at the museum for now?
About 15 years. I was introduced to the museum, or reintroduced about 15 years ago by a friend of mine who used to be the RTR, and came down here, decided that if you're going to support a charity, you might as well do something you're interested in. So came down here and started volunteering every month. And at that time it was a bit difficult because I was commuting from Scotland, so I got on a plane, literally managed to do that for many years. And then actually I've now moved more locally to the museum, as well as doing other things, of course.
And of course, like I ask everybody, what is the passion about tanks?
I don't really know. I always liked them as a boy. Simple as that. You know, boys like trains, planes, dinosaurs. Tanks just seemed like great big dinosaurs. And I was just really interested in the history. And as you got older, you get interested in the military history, what people have done, all the sacrifice, all the things that we now look at as sort of important historical moments, and also the engineering side. So it's got it all really. And what's great being a volunteer over many years, and now I'm doing different sorts of volunteering as well, is just meeting lots of people. as I think we said, this is one place where you can feel normal because everybody's the same and everybody else is strange because we all like tanks.
Now, you are a vehicle owner, of course, as well. Your choice of vehicle?
It sort of happened because I started volunteering, then we wanted a volunteers project and managed to hear about the Stewarts that came to the country a few years ago from Brazil. So I've got my first tank is an M3A1 Honey, made in May 1942, and that's been restored and lives here at the museum. And then after that, we sort of slightly got carried away. And my motivation has been, as being able to help the vehicle owner, is to try and secure vehicles that might be lost and the museum can't buy, and maybe if I can help and pay for restoration and running of them, we've got something that runs here which is otherwise not. So we may have an example in the museum, but actually not a working example. So that's what we're trying to do.
I've always been fascinated with the restoration of vehicles. I mean, for you and your vehicles, was there a particular part that you can get hold of? Was there a particular something which was really painful and you thought at one stage?
There's a lot of stuff that we actually find difficult to get hold of. It just depends on the vehicle, because actually something like the Stewart, there were quite a lot of parts around it. It was in quite good condition, but again, you're sourcing certain bits from America and other places. We just finished a restoration of an M24 Chaffee, and that again we had sourcing parts from America, various trips to Holland, bits from Belgium, and that in some respects is slightly easier because that vehicle's been in service longer with NATO armies. And then the Sherman, which is the M4A4, which hopefully will be running well today, is the hardest of all because there are no multi-banks, only 3 multi-banks running in the world. So that's a really hard engine to find bits for or anything, frankly.
Is there a dream vehicle you would love to own yourself, perhaps, one?
I don't really know, actually. As I say, the motivation is to get stuff that we can run here that otherwise are in the collection but not run. So that's the fun of it. I've got a couple on my bucket list, but I won't tell you. I've got one in the pipeline. I've got one in the pipeline.
William, thank you so much for taking the time out to us. Final thing there, why should people come to Tank then?
Because it's great fun, as I said. You can come here, if you like tanks, you're the person who's normal, everybody else outside isn't. And I think you meet everybody, see a lot of real kit, and it's the biggest movement of historic armour in the world. Can't beat that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, William. Welcome back to TankFest Online 2022. Massive thank you, of course, to William there for spending some time with us. And I think what it does is highlight the significance and, of course, the critical importance of the volunteers to the museum, Richard.
Yeah, like many museums, we rely heavily on volunteers to really do what we do as an organisation. So here at TankFest, basically, they're all out helping us. So we've got about 40, 50 guys helping us out over in the...
いやー、これをポンする道があったのかい。
I saw him at the top of a chaffee earlier. And we've got a host of volunteers helping on guiding, on ushering visitors, on checking tickets, in almost every function. They really play a completely key role in what we do.
And as far as obviously William is a particularly, not only volunteer, trustee, but also a vehicle owner. The vehicle owners, it's sort of, do you refer to it as a long-term loan or something when the vehicles come in?
It depends. So there's a number of vehicles who actually effectively live here at the Tank Museum. So actually William owns a number of vehicles which stay here and actually we use them regularly in space. But equally we engage very heavily with a lot of the private owners because they don't often get a chance to show their stuff off in public. And if you're going to own one of these vehicles, part of the joy of having it's like a classic car. You want it to be seen. Show it off. That's part of the excitement of owning it. So everyone can say, wow, that's really cool.
And don't forget, of course, that to make sure Twitch drops there, you're keeping an eye on that. And also TankFest, the 2022 Vegas on the World Tanks portal.
And please carry on, do support the Tank Museum through whichever ways you go, whether it's a facility buy or whether it's buying things from our online shop. Biggest seller in the last few years has been tank slippers, which are...
Not the tank slippers.
The tank slippers, I have my own pair. They are remarkably warm. And it's a great way, I find, to impress your teenage daughters. So give me the eye roll of love whenever I wear them.
And I think you've missed out here. We should have obviously been wearing TankFest slippers when we did this.
We probably should have been. I think it would have completed the look as opposed to the kind of the second-hand Formula One look, which we're currently, I think, pulling off really rather successfully.
Of course, Richard, first time back since obviously the pandemic, all those problems there. What's it been like as a museum? To organise, I imagine, quite manic?
Yeah, it's been challenging on many levels. And anyone who's running basically like we are, it's essentially a tourist attraction. has had a pretty rough time over this pandemic. We were closed for almost half of a 2-year stint. But we've come back in good shape, and we're really pleased that we've been able to do Tank Fest in September last year, and we're back here in the sunshine in Dorset doing Tank Fest once again. And it's we're going to be cutting over imminently now to our main event in many ways of Tank Fest, which centrepiece is going to be our Second World War armour display. And the commentator for this is the museum's curator, who many be familiar with from YouTube. He stars in many ways alongside David Fletcher, and it's our very own curator, Mr. David Willey.
They have armour protection, they are given weapons, but in essence they're training tanks to get the German military up with the idea this is what we're going to need and how we're going to learn the skills of using tanks. They've only made, don't forget, 20 tanks in World War I, so it's a new concept for the German military. And with the Panzer III and the Panzer IV, they're the tanks they want to build to go to war with. Now, Panzer III, that's going to be kind of like, as the British would call it, the cruiser tank. The tank that's going to go through the gaps made once an advance is started. Punch a hole in the front line. These are the tanks that go through the gap and have more mobility, supposedly more speed. Panzer IV is going to be helping punch that gap in the first place. They're given a short-barreled 7.5 centimetre gun. Now, we've been talking about the size of guns all day. 7.5 centimetre, the size of the hole at the end of the barrel. That Panzer IV was going to fire mainly high explosive shells with the idea so they can blast through positions, pillboxes, artillery positions, etc. And then this vehicle would come on behind, originally armed with the standard German 37mm anti-tank gun, but it's got its machine guns. They were just as considered as important early days for machine gunning, clearing the way ahead, and they would be the ones that go off and do the damage. Now, we all know the Germans, they put together their panzer divisions. They're starting to build these tanks in the later 30s. Hitler jumps the gun for the German military. He goes to war ahead of the game, and in 1940, about a third of those tanks that the Germans use invading France and Belgium and Holland, they're actually captured Czech tanks. They're ones that they've taken from Czechoslovakia and used those. 38Ts, 35Ts they're called. Now, our Panzer III that we're seeing rolling around now, the Germans, every time they improve on a model, they call it Ausführung A, B or C. In other words, iteration or mark, we might call it A, B, C, etc. This has got down to Model L, and it's got a bigger gun. It's now got a 5 centimetre gun or 50mm gun. That's the anti-tank gun. We've seen it earlier being towed around the place behind that truck. They've put that on the vehicle and they've added extra armour. We've now up to 5 centimetres of frontal armour on this vehicle. And as it parks up, you can see there's an extra piece bolted on the front to give it more protection, because by the time this tank is starting to see action, the British have now come up with their 6-pounder anti-tank gun, which has got more penetration than the earlier 2-pounder one. Really confusing, isn't it? Because the British start calling their gun size by the weight of solid shot fired, not by the size of the hole in the barrel, although we change that as the war goes on. Now, this vehicle, because it was going to North Africa, it's actually got additions to it. So they call this tropen, tropicalized, and they have extra filters so that the air is cleaned before it gets into the engine. Otherwise, all that dusty, sandy air of the desert will wear out your engine too quickly. Our Tiger has a similar arrangement. Tiger 131, because it was heading off to North Africa, they put extra what they call FIFO air filters on the back of it. Now, this vehicle, we know, was sent out to North Africa in April of 1942. It goes to the 8th Panzer Division. We think it was captured at the Battle of Alam Halfa. It's basically Rommel's last gasp push against the British positions before Alamein and Montgomery. He's taken a grip, as he would use it, of the 8th Army. He refuses to let them go and attack or leave their positions. Let the Germans blunt their attack on our own anti-tank defences and our new Sherman and Grant tanks that we've got out there. So this is captured then. You can actually see battle damage on it. One of those front sprockets has got a nice big hole from some shell firing. It was brought back to Britain. We have photographs of it being debombed out in Benghazi after its capture, taking all the ammunition out, so it was safe to transport back to Britain. And it goes up just off the M3 motorway, a place called Chertsey. That's where they did all the analysis in World War II, captured vehicles, so we could learn what's the best way of defeating it, any good ideas we can nick for our own tank design, etc. And then in 1951, this tank comes down to the Tank Museum, where it's become, well, a regular runner here pretty much ever since it came here. And it's now back in those original colours done by the workshops. Dunkelgelb, this sandy-looking colour that the Germans paint, not just for North Africa, but they paint most of their vehicles from about 1943 onwards in this look, and sometimes camouflage to the top. Now, two more relatively early war tanks. We've got a lovely vehicle on loan to us. Sometime soon, maybe in the next year or so, it's going to go back to Japan, where it was made, followed up behind it by the Stuart tank, the M3, or the British would call it a Stuart, the Americans the M3 light tank. Going to start with the Japanese tank first of all. It's called a Hargo, or a Type 95. And in the early 1930s, the Japanese, they've built a big heavy tank. They've imported a couple of tanks from Britain. They like the idea of the tank, but they want something faster. So the cavalry is saying, come on, if we're going to go ahead, or we've got lorried infantry, we can go about 25 miles, even 30, we're going to need a tank that can keep up. So a Japanese designer called Tommy O'Hara, that's his real name, not an Irish comedian, Tommy O'Hara, he comes up with this design. He comes up with a new bell crank suspension system. You'll see it rocking away there. Used to make the crew sick, so they add an extra bar between those two suspension systems. You can see front and back to try and lessen the rocking motion of the vehicle. It's got relatively thin armour for the time, and it's got a 37mm gun, which when this was first being produced, they start making them in 1935. That's not a bad gun to have on a tank. It fires armour-piercing or high-explosive rounds together. Now, the problem with it, it's quite cramped. You've got a three-man crew, two in the hull, driver and another gunner there, and you've got the commander on his own up in the turret. And in the back, because of one of those British tanks the Japanese had imported, in the back of the vehicle, there's actually a Mitsubishi diesel engine. The Japanese like the idea of diesel because it's harder to actually set on fire than petrol, and they've had this bad experience with a petrol engine. So a diesel engine to try and lessen the risk of fire. This vehicle has very little opposition up to 1939 when it's being used in countries. Japan's advance into China. It only in 1939 at a place called Khalkhin Gol does this tank meet Russian tanks under Marshal Zhukov. And by that, the Japanese military get a bloody nose. For the first time, they have met a force that's as strong, if not stronger, and better led than them. And that stops the Japanese from actually taking on the Russians at all. And of course, then later in the war, this tank seems to be outclassed when it starts meeting American tanks in the Pacific. But Japan's aim early on in the war, it's really about naval power to get its influence around the Pacific. Tanks are very secondary to the Japanese. Now, the vehicle following up is the M3 light tank, designed in America. It was put together in a bit of a hurry from component parts the Americans had been testing throughout the 1930s. Only in 1940 does America get back together to reform an armoured force. An armoured corps is put together to have tank divisions. It's been done away with after the First World War. They separate the tanks into what they call combat cars to get round the Senate ruling. They give some to the cavalry, some to the infantry. This is now going to be a tank for this new force, a new armoured force. They use a radial engine. It's got an aeroplane engine in the back. You can hear that noise of that. It's an R975 radial engine in the back of the vehicle to power it along, and that's quite high. That's why the rear of the vehicle looks quite high up. 37mm gun, so about the same size gun, but it's got more velocity, more welly coming out behind the rounds than the one on the Hargo tank. And one of the problems, though, with the M5 is range. It doesn't go that far, only about 75 miles an hour. That one's painted up as a British one. The British were first to use it in Operation Compass later in 1941.
うわ、なんもねえ
Now,
かい。
it's replaced later. We're going to see how it's replaced as well. First of all, they do an upgraded version of that tank called the M5, and then they come up with something called the Chaffee, and we're going to see the Chaffee in a moment. Before that, here comes a very unique vehicle. In fact, it is the only one left of what's called a Valentine DD tank. DD, duplex drive. It means you can drive this vehicle two ways. One on its tracks, that we can see it now, but that sausage of canvas that you can see around the hull is a second way you can drive it. It can float. The canvas screen comes up and it displaces enough water that it will float across a river, lake, or even in the sea. And the second way,
うわー、やっちゃった。
they can lock the propellers that are on the back into the engine and drive it that way and spin the propellers to take you through water.
そんなに動機あん
The
の
whole idea of this is through a guy called Nicholas Strausler. He's a Hungarian who's working in Britain. He knows we're trying to find ways to float tanks. In the museum, we've got a Mark 9 First World War tank. They floated one of those in World War I. The last day of the war, there's one of those floating on a lake in London. They know you need to float tanks to get across rivers, maybe for sea landings, etc. So they know they're going to have to do that again, especially as we've got to re-invade Europe. So they start, Strausler starts with a light tank, gets it to float, gets the idea, a Tetrarch tank. He then moves on to the Valentine that we can see here. And this particular Valentine, it's got the longer gun, what they called, it's basically a quick-firing 75mm. It's basically the British 6-pounder bored out to take American 75mm ammunition. That's part of its problem. If you look at the gun as it faces forward, it overhangs that canvas screen. So the only way it could float properly is you turn the gun in reverse and float ashore with it facing towards the back. They test these vehicles. All the guys that are going to go ashore on D-Day are trained on these Valentine tanks. Just before D-Day, April 1944, down the road at Studland Harbour, not far from here, they test some of these in fairly rough weather. Exercise smash. 6 of them sink to the bottom. 6 guys' lives are lost, only 1 guy who gets washed up. And some of those tanks are still there in Studland Harbour. The British learned from this, take the tanks very close to the beach. They were going to be launched 4 miles out on D-Day. Go in 2 miles, as close as you can. Take that risk of shell fire, launch them closer. Now on D-Day, of course, they use the Sherman DDs. We've got one in the museum. Their gun is shorter, so it can be facing forward. And the key thing there is they knew they wanted those screens to go down, and almost instantly they need those guns available for firing at the enemy positions on the beaches. That's why they needed the Sherman version, and they only use these for training. They're used for training to the end of the war. Some of them do actually see, they cross the River Po in Italy. They're used to bring up ammunition, etc. But this is the last remaining one. The owner, John Pearson, is there at the moment. He got the hull out of the bottom of a factory. The turret was broken up, and he spent years putting this vehicle back together. The screen does go up. He can demonstrate that, but quite sensibly, he's never going to float it on the ocean again. We don't want to see another last remaining Valentine DD sunk. 8,000 Valentines made in the Second World War. It's a tank Britain makes the most of, but we tend to forget about. 2,000 of those are made in Canada. Most of the Canadian ones are sent straight to support the Red Army. They're sent straight over to Russia, supporting the Red Army. Great tank, reliable, 2 types of diesel engines, AEC, GMC diesels in the back. You know, it was a really good, successful tank from the British point of view. Now, we're going to see some classic Second World War American armour coming on now. I won't talk too much about the Sherman. I mentioned the fact that America, it reforms its armoured force. It's not, of course, actually involved in the war till December of 41, but the American military, we've got British and French agents going over to America saying, can you build tanks for us? The American military quite rightly turns around and says, well, why not go in with us into the designer tank we're going to make? So we end up buying the M3 Grant tank, then the M4 Sherman, then we get Lend-Lease, so we're given these vehicles to help fight the Nazis. And the Sherman is what the American armoured divisions are going to want to use. And the armoured division, their philosophy is, once we're attacking, these are the tanks to go forward at speed and exploit the breakthrough. The American doctrine at the same time was thinking about what happens, because they've seen Blitzkrieg in Europe in 1940, what happens when the enemy come the other way with their tanks, like the Panzer IIIs and the Panzer IVs. And instead of thinking the tank's the best weapon to knock them out, they come up with a doctrine that they call the tank destroyer doctrine. And he says, looking back, the third vehicle in that lineup is something called the M18 Hellcat. Not a tank, technically, even though it looks like one. It's what the Americans would call a tank destroyer. And the idea here was their doctrine was going to be put a gun on a fast carriage, and that, to start with, was half-tracks, like you can see in the middle there with that M16 half-track. Put a gun on that. It can speed to where the enemy have broken through and try and knock out their tanks in ambush. Then they say, let's put it on a track chassis so it can go everywhere. And they make something called the M10 Tank Destroyer. And then they move on to that M18, which is even thinner armoured and faster to get to where a breakthrough might be. Now, with that M18 Tank Destroyer, only half-inch thick armour, nowhere near as thick as on this Sherman tank. They put in the back of it another one of those aeroplane engines to power it along. This particular, they'll let the other guys talk about the engines in this Sherman, but that vehicle has got that radial R975 aeroplane engine in the back to give it speed. And the M18 as well, it's got an open top turret. So the guys inside have got really good all-round visibility, so they can see supposedly the enemy tanks they're going to be trying to knock out. 55 miles an hour, the M18. That's very fast for a tank. So I say a tank destroyer, I should say, of course. So that doctrine, when the Americans go to Europe, Sherman tanks for the breakthrough and exploitation, enemy tanks coming the other way, we're going to try and knock them out with tank destroyers. Quite simply, it doesn't work. The doctrine fails, so they stop using tank destroyers in the way they were planned. They were going to make 8,000 of these M18 tank destroyers. They stop at 2,000 because a message is coming back to people like General McNair back in America. This is a failed doctrine. Even Patton says it doesn't really work for us. You can't have the right vehicles in the right place at the right time. So in the end, the Sherman, they upgun that Sherman tank. We see our Fury one in a moment, has a 76mm, the same gun they put in this M18 Hellcat to try and knock out enemy tanks. The end result is, at the end of World War II, your best way of defeating a tank is with another tank, because it's got armour protection, it's got mobility to get to the same places as the enemy tank has, and that seems to be the best way of doing things. Now, the Hellcat, the M18 there, does have its moment. They have success at September 44 at the Battle of Arracourt. where about 4 of these are knocked out, but they managed to take out just over 30 German tanks. And they're used very effectively in the Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne. There's a crossroads in a small village. The speed of these are going at 55 miles an hour, race ahead. They capture the village before the Germans get there, and they lay a very good defence. Now, this particular MA team, we know, went to Europe. It then goes back to America. They were rebuilt, and there was a program in the 1950s where there was basically American support for Tito in Yugoslavia. We didn't want Tito to go to communist Russia. We wanted him to accept material from the West. And this tank was one of those given to the Yugoslavian military. If you've all been watching films like Kelly's Heroes, all those Shermans in Kelly's Heroes, they're ones that America gave to the Yugoslav army to try and reinforce them and to get Tito on our side, as it were. When Yugoslavia broke apart many years later, this was in combat when the Serbs were fighting each other. And if you look at the front of this vehicle, there's actually a hole in it where it was knocked out. And then back in 2002, this was imported into the UK, restored, and it's now privately owned by the owner who's driving it at the moment. Now, there's a symbol on the side there, Tank Destroyer Command. That was based at Fort Hood in America. Early in the war, lots of interest in this doctrine. Very quickly, though, it fades away. And by the end of the war, many of these tank destroyers, they disband half the units and spread the tanks out for use as support amongst the infantry instead. Now, the other side of the world, the Russians, they've got into tanks very early on. They import some British Vickers tanks. They send their agents to the Vickers factory in England. 1930, they buy the export, the Vickers export, or we would call it the 6-ton tank.